Welcome to Objective Morality. The content in this video presentation will go over how and why I choose to remain moral without belief in a deity. There is a lot of territory to cover, so I will initiate my position, arguments, and objective premise quickly as possible without compromising video longevity. To begin, I will read you a quote from arguably one of the most influential minds known to man. Strange is our situation here on earth. Each of us coming for a short period visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that man is here for the sake of other men, above all for upon whose smiles and well-being our own happiness depends. Albert Einstein. Considering I'm an atheist or rejection of existence of God or gods, where do I get my morality? Why should I be good? This question is extremely loaded and tricky to say the least. A simple answer would be because there are consequences for all our actions, both good and bad. Let's begin with the bad. How do we define something as immoral? By definition, immorality is violation of principles not conforming to the patterns of conduct, which are usually accepted or established as inconsistent. With that definition, is stealing immoral? What diagnoses stealing to not conform to the patterns of moral conduct? Christian apologists, if you have any familiarity with it or the 30,000 denominations thereof, will deem stealing as immoral because you ought not steal. This answer is redundant and would not answer even the simplest of the proposition. The right way to approach this is to say stealing is diagnosed as wrong because it diminishes well-being and unnecessarily causes anguish to the victim of the action. If something is taken, whether it be money, possessions, or things the other person deems valuable without prior consent or lackluster permission, the presupposition will be immoral. Is murder wrong? Let's define murder, shall we? When a person of sound memory and discretion unlawfully terminates the life of any reasonable sentient creature or being without prior consent. When we look at this definition and apply it to the Christian deity, this deity has committed this act on multiple occasions. The Great Flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, the 2 bears sent to maul 42 children of mocking a prophet's bald head, Jesus, firstborn Egyptian children, the Jericho genocide. I most definitely could keep going, but we'll leave that for another presentation. One undisputed conclusion that comes to my attention and should come to any rationally minded individual is, shouldn't it be systematically moral if God commits the act of murder? If our moral standards are based on this deity, which it certainly shouldn't be, then the consistency of God's character and our moral standards are subjective of Him. Following these votive commandments and allegiance to this deity's nature consequently makes killing another sentient being justifiable. When all is said and done, it seems like our intentions to want to follow this deity's commandments is to gain approval, reward, or reciprocation for being obedient. On the other hand, in terms of relegating disapproval or premonition of retribution, we vow not to displease, disobey, or assuage subsequent adoration from this deity. In short, if we are following these pronouncements and declarations thereof as a direct result to pursue a reward or fear punishment, wouldn't that be considered immoral? Showing servile compliance or deference would be insufficient if the act wasn't altruistically inspired and acted upon with genuine sincerity. The inherent false dichotomy of religion and ethics seem like it's inadequate with our moral compass, so much that it can have detrimental psychological effects. Our sentient cognitions undermines the very necessity for the need of outside validation in order to be morally just. This brings me to my next point. Without the figment of a divine watchman, would society continue to be moral? Let's ask a hypothetical question. If the police and/or law enforcement agencies were to go on strike or be completely abolished, would we continue to be generous, moral, kind, and empathic? If the answer to the aforementioned question is yes, then we demonstrated that God isn't necessary for a moral diagnosis. Religion poisons the mind of people if exploitation of emotional guilt is the driving force of our ethical self-conductivity. Science, however, can't give principal answers to moral values, such as what are demonstrable morality and ethics, which would pose an intrinsic goodness in one's lifetime. It can illustrate how cosmological and naturalistic events occur, but in the absence of a sentient conscious mind, morality will have no definition. Human beings' social scale is absolutely gargantuan in scope and predicates to the default well-being of others. We innately want to be loved, social, belong to communities which accept us regardless of flaws and mishaps, have prudent friendships, and obligate to live as morally and altruistic life as possible. If we were always happy, wouldn't we devalue anything we value today as happy, such as romantic films, hanging out with friends, or intimate relationships? There will be an arbitrary equilibrium as a direct result of perpetual well-being if happiness was always prevalent. Unable to remain satisfied is one of humans' most promiscuous shortcomings, and that's being generous. The pursuit of happiness, in general terms, is adequately sufficient than actual happiness, and that assertion is amenable to argument. The journey and experience of getting to a destination, which cumulatively develops our sense of appreciation, is consequently the utmost benefactor of our cognitive intuition. Let's move on. Should there be a conscious supernatural intelligent designer who is the epitome of compassion, why is there a possibility to suffer or feel pain? This is an obvious glaring contradiction of benevolence attributed to this being in a metaphysical sense, and is unorthodox to put it mildly. If natural selection is the driving force behind the scenes, this conundrum is understood. In terms of natural selection, it could quite frankly give two squirts of piss if the outcome causes suffering. Self-replication and survival of the genes which the organism contains is its only concern. Theologians try to rebut this argument with free will. If God has a plan for us, thus omniscient, then we have no free will. If this is the case, free will is at its all-time nauseating high considering current events. Take a look at the ISIS incident. Morality having a Darwinian origin is a hard concept to accept. However, argumentum ad consequentiam, the proposition doesn't appeal to good consequences, is a fallacious argument and doesn't propose it as false. It has always been overwhelming that even in the 21st century, we still feel the urgency to predicate our morality from ancient scriptures, which are taboo to criticism. We usually don't question these clearly absurd ideologies in foresight of offending others or enhancing their despair. Does our morality come from the Bible? I most certainly hope not, and for Darwin's sake not from the Old Testament. In the New Testament, the penalty for adultery is death. Clinton and modern-day celebrities will be a sorry lot indeed. The human race's emotional attachment to this grander doctrine is so immense that in spite of how degrading, extremely violent, or discriminatory its consequence, it's still praised over, followed, and passed down to generations in spoken and written form. Speaking of written form, and to close, the Bible is full of contradictory assertions, immoral doctrine, false prophecies, and many scientific inaccuracies. I try to live as morally a life I can, minus societal religious indoctrination, and strive towards the ingenuity of my decisions to aid those who aren't as fortunate. If this book is the source of morality, as Christians assert, then why does it condone slavery, rape, pillage, homophobia, and genocide? Fear and psychological abuse of eternal suffering poised by religion does not in any way substantiate my morality. Responsibility is my prime interest when it comes to ethics, and with all the power I can muster, I will strive towards my intelligently concocted notion to achieve honesty, sanity, and well-being of myself as well as others. Thanks for watching Objective Morality. Feedback, likes, and subscriptions are appreciated. If there is one thing I can add to your moral repertoire, question everything, strive for what your heart desires, and never submit during that pursuit.